twilight hues bled through the stained glass windows of Graceland, casting long purple shadows across the parquet floors. Elvis sat in the living room, a space that felt both grand and strangely empty, even when filled with laughter and music. Tonight it was just him. The silent flicker of the television and the persistent hum of the air conditioning. A heavy quiet had settled over the house, the kind that made the smallest sound. A floorboard creaking, a distant siren echo with exaggerated clarity. He picked up a worn leather-bound photo album from the coffee table. His fingers, usually so agile and strong on a guitar neck, traced the faded gold lettering on the cover. Memories. A simple word, yet it held so much weight. He didn't often look at these old pictures. Sometimes they brought too much joy, a sharp pang of nostalgia for simpler time. More often they brought a different kind of ache, a subtle throb in his heart that had nothing to do with fame, money, or the constant demands of his career. He flipped past the glossy studio shots, the concert poses, the movie stills. His gaze didn't linger on the dazzling lights or the screaming crowds. He stopped on a particular page, a black and white photograph, a little blurred at the edges. It was of a small wooden church, its paint peeling nestled among ancient oak trees. The sky above was wide and hopeful even in the grainy image. Tupelo, he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. It wasn't the church itself that held his attention, not entirely. It was what it represented. It was the feeling, the sound, the promise. For years, people had speculated about his struggles. They talked about the Colonel, the diet pills, the exhaustion, the pressure to churn out movies and records. They talked about the pain of his divorce, the loneliness of being Elvis. All of that was true. Of course it was real, and it hurt. But there was something else, something deeper, more personal that gnawed at him. It wasn't a public failure, not really. It was a private one, a whisper in the quiet hours that he couldn't quite silence. He remembered a time when music wasn't about charts or ticket sales. It was about something else, entirely, something sacred. A memory flashed through his mind, sweat trickling down his brow under the harsh stage lights, the roar of the crowd like a hungry beast, the rush of adrenaline. He loved it. He truly did. But sometimes when he hit a certain note, a high-soaring gospel harmony, a thought would pierce through the euphoria. Is this it? Is this what you were meant for? Closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the plush velvet of the sofa. The grandiosity of Graceland, the sheer scale of his life, often felt like a beautiful golden cage. He had everything, and yet there was this hollow space, this yearning for something undefined, something he felt he'd lost, or never quite grasped. He thought of the hundreds of songs he'd recorded, the dozens of movies he'd made. He'd brought joy to millions, inspired countless musicians, changed the face of music. Forever, but the title felt heavy sometimes, like a crown that weighed him down, preventing him from reaching for something else. He heard the whispers read, the articles. He should have fired Parker. He should have made more serious movies. He should have taken care of himself. If only fixing those things could erase the quiet, persistent ache that truly haunted him. He opened his eyes and looked at the photo again. The humble church, the wide sky. He remembered the feeling of his mother's hand in his walking down the dusty road, the scent of honeysuckle thick in the air. He remembered the voices inside that church, raw and pure, singing praises. And he remembered a feeling, a conviction deep in his young soul that his own voice was meant for something profoundly different, something transcendent. He had promised himself back then that he would use it. He would use it to lift spirits, to heal, to connect people not just to a beat, but to something eternal. And somewhere along the way, amidst the dazzling lights and the roaring crowds, he felt he had strayed. He hadn't failed in fame, but in something far more personal and spiritual. And that was the true ghost in the quiet corners of Graceland. The ghost of an unfulfilled calling, a silent song he never fully sang. He sighed, the sound barely audible above the hum of the house. He closed the album, placing it back on the table. The image of that church, that sky, that feeling, remained etched behind his eyelids. It was a secret sorrow, a silent burden he carried even as the world saw him as the epitome of success. It was a failure, not of performance, but of purpose, and it gnawed at him more deeply than anyone could ever know. The next morning, Graceland was stirring. Kitchen staff bustled. The aroma of bacon and coffee wafted through the hallways, and the faint murmur of voices could be heard from the dining room. But Elvis wasn't there. He was in his private sanctuary, the little room off the den filled with his books, his records, and a few cherished personal items that never saw the light of day on public tours. He sat cross-legged on the floor, an old acoustic guitar resting on his knee. It wasn't one of his fancy stage guitars gleaming with sequins or mother-of-pearl inlay. This was a simple, worn instrument, its wood smooth from years of handling, a few scratches telling silent stories. He had owned it since he was a teenager, before the fame, before the frenzy. His fingers idly strummed a chord, a simple C major, then another, a G. They weren't flashy rock and roll riffs. They were gentle, almost mournful melodies, the kind you might hear drifting from an open church window on a Sunday morning. He wasn't trying to write a hit song. He was just playing, letting his fingers find their own way through the landscape of his memory. Sometimes, when the noise of the world grew too loud and the weight of being Elvis felt too heavy, he retreated here. In this quiet corner, he could just be himself, the boy from Tupelo before the king was born. It was in these moments that the failure felt most acute, most real. He remembered a dream he'd had just last night. He was standing on a vast, empty stage, bathed in a single spotlight. He opened his mouth to sing, but no sound came out. He tried harder, straining, but his voice was gone, replaced by a hollow echo. Then a single pure note, like a chime, sounded from the darkness beyond the light. It wasn't his voice, but it was what his voice was meant to be. He reached for it, but it drifted further away, just out of his grasp. He woke up with a gasp, the phantom ache of that lost note still resonating in his chest. It wasn't that he hadn't sung gospel music. His gospel albums had won Grammys. He loved singing those songs, and he knew they touched people. But even those felt different. They were recorded in studios arranged by producers, mixed for commercial appeal. They weren't the raw, unfiltered outpouring of spirit he had once envisioned. They were polished, perfect, but missing something vital. The pureness, the purpose. Closed his eyes again, his fingers stilling on the strings. Could almost hear the voices now. Not just from the Tupelo church, but from deep within himself, a calling. A sense that his voice was a gift, not just for entertainment, but for something higher. He'd always believed that. Even when he was shaking his hips and singing about blue suede shoes, he felt that undercurrent, that connection to something bigger. But then the machine took over. Colonel Parker, bless his heart, saw dollar signs and fame. He didn't see the spiritual yearning, the artist's soul that wanted to create something timeless, something that transcended the fleeting trends of pop music. Or maybe he saw it and simply didn't care, or didn't know how to package it for the masses. Elvis had tried to talk about it early on. He'd mentioned wanting to do a whole album of just pure spirituals, no strings, no big orchestras, just voices and a simple piano or guitar. Parker had humored him, then steered him towards another movie soundtrack, another rock and roll single. People want the Elvis they know. Son, the hip-shaking Elvis. That's where the money is, and that's where the fans are. And Elvis, young and eager for success, had listened. He told himself he could weave his spiritual purpose into his popular music. He could sing with soul, with heart, and that would be enough. But it never felt enough for him. Picked up a small leather-bound notebook from the floor beside him. Its pages were filled with handwritten lyrics, not for popular songs, but for hymns he'd heard or imagined. Some were simple praises, others deep questioning reflections on life, faith, and meaning. He'd started these over the years, scribbling them down in hotel rooms, on planes, ideas for melodies danced in his head, harmonies that felt ancient and new all at once. This was the unwritten symphony, the unrecorded album that truly haunted him. It wasn't about another hit. It was about this This pure spiritual expression, he felt called to create an offering not to the world, but to a deeper truth within himself. He'd never found the time, the space, the freedom to make it. The demands of his career had always pulled him away like a powerful current, dragging a small boat out to sea. He ran his thumb over the blank pages at the back of the notebook. So much still unsaid, unsung. He felt a profound sense of regret, a heavy weight that settled in his chest. He was the king, yes, but he had failed to fulfill his deepest, most sacred artistic promise to himself. And that more than any public misstep was the silent, aching sorrow that echoed in the quiet corners of Graceland. The air in the East Tupelo Assembly of God Church was always thick with the scent of old wood dust and fervent prayer. Sunlight streamed through the tall, narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Like tiny golden blessings, young Elvis, barely 10 years old, sat squished between his mother, Gladys, and his father, Vernon. On a hard wooden pew, he wasn't always paying attention to the sermon. His gaze often drifted to the worn hymnals, the simple cross, or the faces of the congregation. But when the singing started, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just music. It was a force. Sister Rosetta was at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with a joyful abandon that made the old instrument sing. Brother Elijah, with his deep, resonant voice, led the congregation, his eyes closed in pure devotion. And then the choir, a patchwork of local voices, rose in unison, their harmony swelling and filling every corner of the modest church. Elvis listened, really listened. He felt the vibrations in his bones, a warmth spreading through his chest. He tried to mimic the harmonies, his small voice weaving in and out of the grown-up singing. Sometimes a voice would stand out clear and true, cutting through the others like a beam of light. One Sunday after the service, a kindly old woman, Sister Beatrice, her face a map of gentle wrinkles, approached him. She had a way of looking at you right into your soul that made you feel completely seen. "Elvis Presley," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You got a gift, child, a true gift from the Lord." He blushed, shuffling his feet. "No, boy, it's more than liking. It's a calling. Your voice, it's got a special spirit in it. It can heal, it can uplift, it can touch places in folks' hearts that words alone can't reach." She knelt down, her eyes level with his. "You promise me, child, you'll never let that gift be wasted. You promise you'll use it for something true, something that matters more than just making folks tap their feet." His young heart swelled with a mixture of pride and a sense of solemn responsibility. He didn't fully understand what she meant by something true, but he felt the weight of her words like a sacred trust. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I promise." Gladys, who had been listening nearby, smiled, her eyes shining. "He will, Sister Beatrice. He's a good boy, with a good heart." That moment, that promise became a quiet cornerstone of Elvis's young life. It wasn't about becoming famous. It was about using his voice to serve a higher purpose, to bring comfort and light, to speak to the soul. He spent hours alone in his room, singing along to gospel records, trying to emulate the power and passion of the singers, but always adding his own unique twist, an emotional depth that was beyond his years. He loved rhythm and blues, too, the raw energy of it, the way it made your body move. But the spiritual music, the gospel, that was where his heart truly resided. He felt a profound connection to it, a sense of belonging and purpose that transcended mere entertainment. He imagined creating music that combined the raw power of the blues with the soaring spirituality of gospel. Music that could truly reach into the depths of a person's being and lift them up. When he moved to Memphis and started playing guitar, he brought that promise with him. He'd stand in front of the mirror, strumming, singing, picturing himself not just on a stage, but in a place where his voice could truly touch souls. He envisioned songs that were prayers, sermons, and celebrations all rolled into one. He wasn't thinking about hit singles. He was thinking about resonance, about impact. He would sometimes visit Sun's studio just to listen. He'd hear the bluesmen, the country singers, the gospel quartets. He absorbed it all, letting it marinate within him. Sam Phillips, when he first heard Elvis, recognized that unique blend of raw energy and deep soul. He saw the potential for a new sound, a sound that would shake the world. But Elvis, even as he chased the dream of making a record, held on to that promise from Sister Beatrice. He believed his rock and roll would be a vessel for that deeper connection, that spiritual essence. He believed he could make people dance and make them feel something profound at the same time. He remembered his first time recording at Sun. The excitement was overwhelming, a dizzying rush. He sang the blues, he sang country, and he sang with all the fire and passion he possessed. But even then, in the back of his mind was the silent vow. This is just the beginning. This is how I get my voice out there so I can fulfill the true promise. Promise wasn't about fame. It was about using that voice for good, for truth, for something timeless. He carried it with him like a secret map, guiding him through the early days, before the roar of the crowds became so deafening, before the demands of the world began to drown out the quiet, sacred melody he was meant to sing. He was an artist with a spiritual mission, even if the world didn't know it. Yet the rise was meteoric. One day, Elvis Presley was a truck driver with a dream. The next, he was a sensation. "That's all right," exploded, followed by Heartbreak Hotel. "Hound Dog, don't be cruel." The world had never seen anything like him. Gurrent's Worry. Colonel Tom Parker appeared like a whirlwind, a force of nature even bigger than Elvis himself. He saw the raw talent, the charisma, and most importantly, the endless potential for profit. Son Parker would boom, his voice always loud, even when he wasn't yelling, "We're going to make you bigger than anyone has ever been." Bigger than Bing Crosby, bigger than Frank Sinatra. "You be the king." Elvis was caught in the dizzying current. The tours were relentless. One city bled into the next. Concerts, TV appearances, interviews. He loved the music, the connection with the fans, the thrill of being on stage. Gradually, subtly, the demands of the machine began to overshadow the quiet purpose he carried. He tried to steer conversations with Parker. "Colonel, what about that gospel album? The one where we just go into a church. No fancy stuff, just pure singing." "Later, son. Later we got movies to make. The public wants to see you on the big screen, and we need another rock and roll single, something catchy, something that sells millions." Elvis would concede, telling himself, "Okay, this is just a stepping stone. Once I'm established, once I have more control, then I can do it." But the stepping stones never seemed to end. Each success led to another demand, another commitment. The schedule was a suffocating blanket, smothering his artistic freedom. His early movies were fun, mostly. He got to sing, he got to act, he got to reach an even wider audience. But the roles were often light, predictable. He longed for something more substantial, something that allowed him to explore deeper emotions, to use his voice not just for entertainment, but for storytelling, for meaning. He imagined a film where his voice in its purest form could deliver a message of hope or redemption. He did record gospel music, albums like His Hand in Mine and How Great Thou Art won Grammys and were beloved by millions. He poured his heart into them, but even those felt like a compromise. They weren't the raw, unadorned, soul-stirring experience he had envisioned. The arrangements, the pacing, the song choices, they were all influenced by commercial considerations. Felt like he was delivering a beautiful performance of a spiritual song, rather than embodying the spiritual experience itself. He remembered Sister Beatrice's words, "Something true, something that matters more than just making folks tap their feet." He made people tap their feet and scream and swoon. He made them happy, but was it something true in the profound way she meant? Was he using his voice to heal, to uplift souls, to reach those deep places in hearts? He hoped so, but he felt a nagging doubt, a sense that he was just skimming the surface of his true potential. The fame became a shroud obscuring a simple boy with a sacred promise. Every choice was scrutinized, every move dictated by managers, studios, and the insatiable appetite of the public. He was Elvis Presley, the king, a brand, a phenomenon. Quiet voice inside him, the one that remembered Sister Beatrice's words, grew fainter, almost a whisper against the roar of his public life. He tried to hold on to it. In between takes on movie sets, he'd gather his musicians and sing gospel for hours, just for themselves, in a pure, uncommercial way. Those moments were precious, fleeting glimpses of what he truly craved. But then the director would call, the lights would come up, and he'd be back to singing another pop tune for a film. The feeling of being unfulfilled, of having missed his true calling, began to settle in a heavy stone in his heart. He was wildly successful, universally adored. He had money, fame, everything a young man could possibly dream of. But the deepest dream, the one born in a small wooden church in Tupelo, felt further away than ever he was living. The dream of the world, but not his own. The ascent to stardom had in a way become a descent from his personal purpose, and he felt it acutely, a quiet sorrow amidst the dazzling chaos of his life. In the quiet hours, after a grueling day of filming or a late-night recording session, Elvis would often retreat to his hotel room or back to Graceland. The entourage would disperse, the noise would fade, and a different kind of work would begin. Not for the cameras, not for the colonel, but for himself. He kept a special notebook separate from his song lyrics or records. This was his unseen scorebook. Its pages were filled with musical ideas that wouldn't fit on a pop album or a movie soundtrack. He'd hum melodies into a small tape recorder, then painstakingly try to transcribe them, even though he wasn't a formal composer. These weren't catchy hooks. They were intricate harmonies, soaring vocal lines, often without words, just pure sound, expressing emotion. He envisioned a multi-part musical work, a profound journey through faith, struggle, and redemption. It wasn't just gospel songs, it was his gospel, a unique blend of the spirituals he adored, the blues he felt in his soul, and the raw power of rock and roll, all channeled into a cohesive, deeply moving experience. He saw it as his magnum opus, a truly timeless piece that would speak to generations long after the fleeting trends of pop music had faded. He'd spend hours at the piano in the Graceland music room, playing simple chords, then layering imaginary vocals over them, sometimes singing softly, sometimes just mouthing the words. Imagining the full choir, the solo voices, the instrumentation, he imagined bringing together the best gospel singers, blues musicians, maybe even some classical players, to create something truly groundbreaking. Imagine, Red, he once murmured to his cousin Red West, who sometimes found him deep in these solitary musical explorations. Just a small choir, pure voices, no big production, but the feeling would be so big, so real, it would touch you right here. He pressed a hand to his chest, where it counts. Red, always loyal and observant, knew these moments were precious to Elvis. He saw the earnestness in his eyes, the passion that went beyond any chart-topping single. Sounds like it'd be powerful. You should do it. Yeah, Elvis would sigh, running a hand through his hair. Someday, when the colonel lets up, when I got time, when I can really focus on it, give it everything it needs. But someday never came. The calls from Parker were relentless. Elvis, we got another movie deal. They want you in Hollywood by next Tuesday. Or, the studio wants 3 new singles by next month. Or, Vegas is calling, King. They need you for another residency. Every time he felt a creative surge, a moment of inspiration for his unseen score, it would be interrupted. The demands of being Elvis, the global superstar, were constant. His energy was drained by tour, films, and the sheer effort of maintaining the public persona. There was no space, no mental or emotional bandwidth left for the deeply personal, time-consuming project he truly yearned to create. He tried to inject elements of his spiritual vision into his regular recordings. He'd insist on adding more gospel tracks to his albums, pushing for arrangements that felt a little more raw, a little less polished. He'd infuse his live performances with a spiritual intensity, particularly when he sang gospel hymns like, "How Great Thou Art." He'd close his eyes, pour his entire being into the song, and for those few minutes he felt a flicker of that true purpose, that profound connection to something larger than himself. But it was never enough to satisfy the deep yearning. It was like tasting a single drop of water when you were parched. He was constantly performing, but he felt he wasn't truly creating the art he was meant to create. The difference between singing a song and creating a symphony of the soul felt vast. The notebook, the tape recorder, filled slowly over the years. Ideas remained fragments, melodies, incomplete. He felt a growing frustration, a sense of creative suppression. It wasn't that he couldn't sing. It was that he couldn't sing his song, the one that truly resided in his heart. This struggle was largely hidden from the public. They saw the dazzling showman, the successful movie star, the best-selling artist. They didn't see him late at night, hunched over a piano, humming fragments of a sacred melody, a silent prayer escaping his lips. Will I ever get to make this? Will I ever fulfill the promise? The unseen score became a symbol of his unfulfilled purpose, a constant reminder of the artist he felt he could have been, the deeper impact he believed his voice was meant to make. It was a beautiful, haunting melody in his mind, forever just out of reach, a testament to the one failure that gnawed at his soul. The year was 1968. The movies for Elvis had become a monotonous blur of formulaic plots, pretty girls and forgettable songs. He was tired, creatively drained, and felt his career was stagnating. The fire that had once burned so brightly was dimming, overshadowed by the grind. Even Colonel Parker seemed worried about Elvis's dwindling appeal. Then came the idea, a TV special, a chance to reintroduce Elvis Presley, the raw, powerful musician, to a new generation and remind the old one what they had loved. It felt like a fresh start, a breath of clean air after years of stale Hollywood air. Elvis poured himself into the special. He wasn't just performing, he was rediscovering himself. The informal sit-down section surrounded by his original band members felt like coming home. He picked up his guitar, looked his musicians in the eye, and sang with a passion he hadn't felt in years. He felt the music resonate in his bones again, raw and unadorned. During rehearsals late at night, when the cameras were off and only a few trusted people remained, Elvis would sometimes veer off script. He'd start playing old gospel tunes or hum melodies from his unseen score notebook. He even started sketching out ideas for a truly profound segment. What if, he mused to Steve Binder, the specials director, who seemed to genuinely understand him, we do a full section, just pure spirituals, not gospel songs, but more like a spiritual journey. Stars with struggle finds redemption. I got these ideas, these melodies. Tell me more, Elvis. What does it sound like? Elvis's eyes lit up. He described the soaring harmonies, the raw bluesy feel, the message of hope and connection. He spoke of the deep personal impact he wanted the music to have beyond just entertainment. He even brought out his unseen score notebook, flipping through pages of scribbled notes and half-formed lyrics. Binder listened intently. He saw the passion, the deep well of untapped creativity. Elvis, this is powerful. This is the real you. We can absolutely weave this in. It could be the most memorable part of the show. Show the world a side of you they've never truly seen. A wave of hope washed over Elvis. This was it. This was the moment. The special was his chance to break free, to finally put that sacred purpose front and center. He started working with renewed vigor. not just on the existing material, but on adapting some of his unseen score ideas into a segment for the show. He called it his spiritual medley, though he hoped it would be much more. He practiced for hours, his voice ringing through the empty soundstage. He felt the pureness returning, the connection to Sister Beatrice's words, to that promise from his childhood. He felt a quiet excitement, building a sense of finally being on the right path. But as the production date loomed closer, the familiar pressures began to mount. Colonel Parker. Ever. The showman began to worry about the segment, Elvis' Son. It's too much gospel, it's too serious. People want the hits. They want the old Elvis, the leather-clad rebel, this spiritual stuff. It's not for a prime-time special. Binder, despite his initial enthusiasm, was also under pressure from the network. They worried about alienating some viewers, about the show being too religious. They wanted more familiar Elvis, more spectacle. Elvis fought for it. He argued, he pleaded, he explained the depth of his vision. This isn't just gospel, Colonel. This is my soul. This is what I'm meant to do. Parker remained unmoved. Meant to do is one thing, son. What sells is another. We have to give them what they want. In the end, compromises were made. The spiritual medley was significantly cut down. Some of the more experimental, deeply personal elements were removed or watered down, while the special did feature powerful gospel numbers and Takei's the more authentic Elvis, the full profound spiritual journey he had envisioned for his unseen score, never made it to air. It was trimmed, polished, and repackaged to fit commercial constraints. Elvis watched the broadcast, a mix of pride and profound disappointment. He was undeniably back, bigger than ever. The special was a massive success, rejuvenating his career, but a part of him felt hollow. The glimmer of hope, the chance to truly fulfill that deeper artistic calling, had been dimmed once again by the demands of the machine. He had come so close, felt it within his grasp, only to have it slip away, leaving him with a lingering ache of a promise almost kept, a symphony almost sung. The haunting, he realized, was far from over. The post-comeback years were a whirlwind. Vegas residencies, sold-out tours, new record deals. Elvis was undeniably back on top, the king reclaiming his throne. But beneath the glittering jumpsuits and the roaring applause, a weariness had set in. The schedule was relentless, the pressure immense. He was constantly performing, constantly giving, until there felt like nothing left for himself. The unseen score notebook sat tucked away in a drawer at Graceland, growing thicker with unfulfilled dreams. He rarely looked at it anymore. The brief flicker of hope from the 68th special had faded into a dull ache. He'd tried, he really had, but every time he pushed for something deeper, something more meaningful, the commercial machine pushed back harder. His health began to suffer. The exhaustion led to insomnia, which led to medication, which led to more problems. His body felt heavy, his spirit even heavier. The joy he once found in music was often replaced by a sense of obligation, a duty to perform for the thousands who had bought tickets, for the millions who expected him to be Elvis. He'd stand on stage delivering powerful performances, hitting those high notes drenched in sweat, bathed in spotlights. Crowd would roar, and for a fleeting moment he'd feel that connection, that rush. But afterwards, alone in his hotel suite, the hollowness would return. Is this all there is? Is this the sum total of my gift? He remembered Sister Beatrice, her kind eyes, her gentle but firm words. Use it for something true, something that matters more than just making folks tap their feet. He made them tap their feet, made them scream, made them cry with joy. But did he truly heal them? Did he uplift their souls in the way he had once envisioned? Or was it just temporary? Euphoria, a dazzling escape from their everyday lives. The guilt, the sense of an unfulfilled purpose settled deep within him. He felt like he had betrayed that young boy from Tupelo, the one who had made that solemn promise. He had traded his sacred calling for fame and fortune. He was grateful for his success, for the ability to provide for his family, for the love of his fans, but the personal cost felt immense. He tried to find solace in other things, his collection of police badges, his friends, his family, but the quiet sorrow, the sense of having missed his true path was always there. A persistent shadow. He would sometimes watch gospel programs on TV, or listen to old gospel records, just pure, unadorned voices singing from the heart. He'd close his eyes, imagining himself among them, his voice blending perfectly, not as Elvis, but as just another singer, offering praise, connecting to something divine. Those were the moments he felt most at peace, and most acutely, the pain of what he felt he had lost. He was trapped by his own legend. The public expected Elvis, the larger-than-life icon. The Colonel exploited it, and Elvis, himself weary and burdened, found it increasingly difficult to break free. The crown he wore felt less like a symbol of power, and more like a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on his true self. His conversations with those closest to him would sometimes hint at this deeper struggle. He'd talk about something missing, about a sense of being unanchored. They would attribute it to the pressures of fame or his personal life, never quite grasping the spiritual dimension of his quiet despair. How could they? He never truly articulated, not fully. It was too personal, too sacred, too intertwined with the deepest part of his soul. He felt the years slipping away, the opportunities fading. He was getting older. His health was declining. The dream of his unseen score, of that profound spiritual work, felt like an impossible fantasy. Now, he believed he had missed his chance, that the time for such a pure, uncompromised artistic expression had passed him by. The failure haunted him, not as a missed hit song, but as a lost calling, a silent prayer that had gone unanswered, perhaps because he had not been strong enough to truly sing it. The weight of that regret was the heaviest burden of all. The summer heat in Memphis was oppressive, even inside the cool confines of Graceland. Elvis felt the lethargy deep in his bones, a constant companion these days. He was sitting in his usual chair in the den, mindlessly flipping channels on the television, when the phone rang. It was his daughter, Lisa Marie. "Daddy?" Her voice chirped, bright and innocent. "Mommy and I were watching something on TV. It was really pretty." "Oh yeah, honey. What was it?" Elvis asked, trying to sound engaged. "It was a choir, Daddy, in a church. They were singing this song, and it sounded like you, but different. It made my tummy feel all warm." Elvis paused a flicker. "Just quieter, more like a whisper, but really strong. Mommy said it was an old hymn. It made her cry." Lisa Marie continued. "And it made me think of when you sing those songs sometimes just for us. Not on the records, but when you're just playing for fun." A jolt went through Elvis. "When you sing those songs, sometimes just for us." She was talking about the raw, unfiltered gospel, the melodies he'd hummed from his unseen score, the spontaneous moments of pure spiritual expression he reserved for his closest circle. Later that day, feeling an unexpected stirring, Elvis wandered into his music room. His gaze fell on the old acoustic guitar, the one he'd had since he was a boy, and then to the dusty unseen score notebook peeking out from under a pile of magazines. He picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. The faded ink, the half-finished lyrics, the sketched melodies. He remembered the intensity of the feelings behind each note, each word. He remembered Sister Beatrice's promise. And he remembered the conversation with Lisa Marie. "It made my tummy feel all warm." His daughter, in her innocent observation, had unknowingly articulated the very essence of what he had yearned to create. Not the grand spectacle, not the chart topper, but something that touched the soul in a profound, quiet, yet powerful way. He sat down, guitar in hand, and began to play one of the melodies from the notebook. A haunting, almost prayer-like tune he'd never fully developed. His voice, a little rougher with age and weariness, still held that unique timbre, that deep soulfulness. He wasn't aiming for perfection, just expression. As he sang, not for an audience, not for a record deal, but just for himself in the quiet room, a strange thought began to form in his mind. What if I haven't completely failed? He thought of the gospel albums he had released, the Grammys he'd won for them. He'd poured his heart into them. Were they not true because they were commercially released? He remembered the letters from fans, countless letters, thanking him for his gospel songs, saying they brought them comfort, hope, even healing during difficult times. People had testified about finding faith through his music. Even amidst the rock and roll spectacle, he always included a gospel song or two. And those were often the most powerful moments of the show, when the crowd fell silent, captivated by the raw emotion, the undeniable spirituality in his voice. He'd seen people moved to tears, truly touched by the power of the music. He'd been so focused on the form of his unseen score, on the grand, comprehensive project he envisioned, that he had perhaps overlooked the impact he was already having. He hadn't created the specific, uncompromised spiritual symphony he dreamed of. But had he in fact been delivering its essence all along, just in a different package? Lisa Marie's simple words were a key unlocking a new perspective. His music, even the pop songs, had always carried a spiritual undercurrent, a raw honesty that connected with people on a deeper level. He hadn't created a traditional spiritual healing album, but his voice, his passion, did heal, did uplift. He had just been too close, too burdened by his own strict definition of success for his deeper calling to see it. The haunting for the first time in years began to lift, replaced by a quiet realization. Maybe the failure wasn't in not creating the masterpiece, but in not recognizing the profound impact his music already had, simply by being true to the soul within him. The promise to Sister Beatrice wasn't just about a specific project. It was about using his voice with truth and spirit, and that he realized he had done every single day of his career. The new perspective Elvis gained was like a quiet dawn breaking after a long, dark night. The weight that had pressed upon him for so long didn't vanish instantly, but it lightened, becoming more manageable. He began to look at his career, his music, and his life through a different lens. He started watching old concert footage, not with a critical eye for what he hadn't achieved, but with a newfound appreciation for what he had. He saw himself on stage, sweat dripping, eyes closed, pouring his heart into Can't Help Falling in Love, or American Tyria. He noticed the faces in the crowd, not just screaming fans, but people with tears in their eyes, mouthing the words, deeply moved. He remembered a letter from a young man serving in Vietnam who wrote that Elvis's music was the only thing that kept him sane, reminding him of home, of hope. He recalled an elderly woman who told him after a show that his gospel songs had helped her through the loss of her husband. These weren't just entertainment. These were profound connections, instances of real comfort and healing. His initial, youthful promise to Sister Beatrice had been about using his voice for something true, something that matters more than just making folks tap their feet. He had envisioned it as a specific grand spiritual work, an unseen score. But now he understood. The truth wasn't confined to a specific musical form or a single unrecorded album. The truth was in the raw honesty he poured into every note, every performance, every song. He realized that his failure was an illusion born of a narrow definition. He had been so fixated on creating a spiritual masterpiece that he hadn't seen how his entire body of work, imbued with his unique soul and passion, was a spiritual masterpiece in its own right. His voice, infused with the blues, gospel, and country he grew up with, had resonated with people because it was authentic, deeply emotional, and spoke to their own human experience, their joys, their sorrows, their yearning for connection. His rock and roll, the very music that brought him fame, had often been dismissed as shallow by critics, but Elvis knew deep down it wasn't. It had a raw power, a liberating energy. It broke down barriers, both musical and social. It was an expression of freedom, and freedom, he now understood, was a deeply spiritual concept. Picked up his old, unseen score notebook again, but this time he didn't feel the familiar pang of regret. Instead, he saw it as a record of his journey, a testament to his deepest desires. He might not have orchestrated that grand symphony, but the melodies and intentions within its pages had undoubtedly infused his popular work, giving it that unique, undeniable soul that no other artist could reshuggy. He thought of the gospel hymns he did record, the ones that won Grammys. He had felt compromises in them, yes, but the pure intention, the devotion, was always there, and that devotion reached millions, comforting and inspiring them. That was the healing Sister Beatrice spoke of. He began to see his life not as a series of missed opportunities, but as a complex, beautiful tapestry. Every thread, every song, every performance, every movie had contributed to a larger impact. He had connected with people not just on a superficial level, but on a deeply emotional and spiritual one, simply by being himself. By singing from his heart, the haunting dissolved. It was replaced by a quiet acceptance, a gentle pride. He had simply been on a different, broader path to fulfilling his promise than the one he had originally envisioned. His voice, his presence, had been a conduit for something truly profound, even when it was wrapped in sequined jumpsuits and surrounded by the glitz of Las Vegas. The unwritten symphony wasn't a failure. It was a realization, an understanding that its notes had been woven into the fabric of his entire career all along. He had given the world his soul, and that was enough, more than enough. In the remaining time, Elvis carried this newfound peace within him. Crushing weight of unfulfilled purpose had lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment, not in what he hadn't done, but in the profound impact of what he had. He continued to perform, to record, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. The strain was still there, the physical toll of his lifestyle and the relentless schedule, but the deep internal ache, the haunting, had faded. He looked at his audience, not just as fans, but as people he was connecting with. On a deeper level, he sang with a renewed sense of purpose, not for fame, but for the shared human experience that music could unlock. When he sang "How Great Thou Art" on stage, his voice soaring, the audience hushed in reverence. He no longer felt the phantom regret of the unseen score. Instead, he felt a profound gratitude. This was it. This was the promise. His voice, in this moment, was touching souls, uplifting spirits, connecting them to something bigger than themselves. He wasn't just performing a hymn, he was sharing a part of his deepest self, and it was resonating. He spent more time in the music room at Graceland, not agonizing over what wasn't, but simply playing, singing, finding joy in the pure act of making music. He'd often hum melodies from his old unseen score notebook, not with the intention of recording them, but just because they brought him peace. Sometimes Lisa Marie would wander in and sit beside him, listening, her small hand resting on his arm. He'd sing those simple, heartfelt tunes just for her, knowing he was passing on a legacy of more than just rock and roll, a legacy of soul, of truth, of connection. He realized that the one failure, he thought, haunted him was, in fact, a misunderstanding of his own powerful success. He hadn't failed to use his voice for healing and profound connection. He had simply done it in a way that wasn't rigidly defined by his youthful ideal of a grand, spiritual masterpiece. His entire career, with all its triumphs and struggles, had been that masterpiece. Every performance, every record, infused with his unique blend of raw emotion, spiritual yearning, and undeniable talent, had been a testament to his deepest calling. His music had provided comfort to the lonely, inspiration to the lost, and joy to millions. It had transcended genres and generations, speaking to the universal human spirit. That was the something true, the something that matters, Sister Beatrice had spoken of. He had lived up to his promise, not in the way he meticulously planned, but in the spontaneous, heartfelt way that connected him to millions. Elvis Presley? The king passed away, leaving behind a legacy that continues to resonate around the world. But the secret sorrow, the silent haunting, had found its peace long before. He understood in his final years that his true impact wasn't measured by record sales or movie grosses, but by the profound, often unspoken connection he forged with countless souls through the honesty and passion of his voice. The melodies of his unseen score may have remained unwritten in the way he initially conceived, but their spirit, their yearning for deeper meaning and connection, had flowed through every single song he ever sang, making his entire life's work an enduring melody of purpose, peace, and heartwarming truth. The ghost was gone, replaced by the quiet, unwavering echo of a promise beautifully kept.